So welcome to this webinar. My name is Caroline Milne. I'm Director of Communications at Joule Assets Europe, and I'll be your host and one of 3 presenters during this live session. So thank you for joining us. Before we begin this webinar on ESCO sales and deal closure, I'd like to go through a couple housekeeping items. Firstly, the presentation is available for download as a PDF file in your GoToWebinar toolbar under Handouts. You will also receive them via email, as well as a link to view the webinar in case you'd like to share your learnings with your colleagues or you'd like to come back to something that you saw in the presentation. We'll go through the presentations one after the other and save questions for the end. Should you have any questions, please write them in the questions box, ideally referencing the person that you wish to answer. We'll go through as many questions as we have in the allotted time. And if we don't get to you, we'll do our best to answer you via email. So finally, on the agenda today, I will kick us off with a presentation from Joule Assets. We'll then hear from Dave Worthington, who is Managing Director of Verco. He'll be speaking about ICP, the Investor Confidence Project. And finally, we'll hear from Paul Cullum, who's Alternative Distribution Manager of HSB Engineering Insurance. So today, I'll just jump right into my introduction. I'm really happy to be here and to be speaking about this. It's a topic that my company, Joule Assets, has seen firsthand, the issue that many energy service companies have with actually selling their projects. And this is really, it's a local issue, but it's also an industry-wide issue. And from Joule's perspective, the real question is how can we as an industry, particularly representing finance, support the success of the energy efficiency market in Europe, particularly energy service companies or ESCOs, and particularly for small to medium ESCOs. One of the reasons I'm very inspired by this, because this form of activity is a key part of a successful energy transition and a successful use of our resources going forward. Not only that, but in supporting ESCOs, we're also supporting on the ground local action and in turn supporting our environment and our communities. However, an absolutely critical roadblock existing in the ESCO market today across many countries is sales. This past month alone, I attended a roundtable event in Dublin as well as in Athens that asked the question of how to grow the energy efficiency market at the national level. And one thing that came up repeatedly in discussion was how to actually incite energy users to switch to energy efficiency, particularly SMEs. And public authorities in both markets are currently exploring policy measures that will encourage energy users to opt into, and using energy, cashing in on energy savings. And I'm also aware that this is the case in many other markets, the UK included. I recently read a report, I believe it came out in May of this year, that was published by BASE, that estimates that the national energy efficiency market isn't growing as fast as it could. And the top 3 barriers to the growth of the market were lack of trust, so from the client towards the supplier and towards the ESCO model and energy efficiency technologies, low end user priority for energy efficiency. I'm sure if there are ESCOs listening in on this webinar, you're aware that your clients have competing priorities. Energy efficiency is low on that list. And financial returns also being generally unclear with high transaction costs involved in actually getting a project off the ground. And there are indeed many other barriers. There are policy barriers as well, but these are the top 3. And I believe that they all are very much linked to a sales model, to be honest. And Joule Assets ourselves, we've been working a lot with energy service companies and investors, and we've seen this come up time and time again, that sales is a really big issue. And so I'm very excited to speak about this today and share the knowledge that we've gained from our experience on the ground. So a bit about Joule Assets to start. Who are we? We started as a dedicated fund ourselves in 2010 in New York for small energy efficiency and demand side projects. We saw firsthand what it takes to develop these markets, looking to enable small to medium-sized businesses succeed, developing and launching their projects. In the US, we now have an ESCO called Joule Smart, and we develop and run these projects as well, and are also working on some community energy projects at the very, very local level. In Europe, we act as a conduit to finance. We've developed this model through the SEIF H2020 project, which developed an online platform which acts as a bridge between energy services and the finance community. This platform is called IIQuad, and I'll be speaking about this today. And at the same time, we also help ESCOs build trust with their customer base and sell more of these projects. So I'll be focusing on this SEIF project and the platform itself in this presentation. So just a bit about the SEIF project. It was a just over 2-year project that went from February 2016 to May 2018. And we developed an IT platform thanks to one of our partners, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, who is really our technical partner. And we worked very closely with HSB and Verco, who you'll be hearing from today, as well as with an ESCO partner and then another university who supported with some future modeling. And this platform really looked to develop a bridge between energy service projects and finance themselves. And I'll just move to the next slide. So again, I won't be referring to the SEIF project anymore. Now I'll be referring to EQuad. This is the name that we came up with for the platform, and we launched this commercially in May 2018 and have been funneling projects through the platform to investors since then. So the European Commission estimates that in order to reach our 2030 climate goals, Europe will need to be spending 177 billion euros a year between 2021 and 2030. Or 2021, sorry, and 2030. That's an absolutely astronomical sum. And within Joule, what we've asked ourselves is how much can we get to achieving that if all viable projects could be successfully financed? Because what we see is that in reality is that many viable projects don't receive financing for reasons that could be overcome and simply aren't. So our mission is to grow these markets. It's the growth of the green economy. It's to enable small businesses to succeed with their energy and efficiency and renewables projects, to make sure that no project is left behind, so to speak. That if it's a good project, if it's solid, we'll really look to find finance, whether it be small in a difficult country or in a difficult market, etc. So on the other side, fund managers also can use the support because today many of them will tell you that they actually have a 95% failure rate. So that means that out of 100 projects that they receive and review on their desk, only 5 to 10% of those will actually reach a financial deal. That's incredibly expensive for a fund, and it means that they can only afford to engage with the large, big ticket items because they have to earn as much as possible from the few projects that they actually manage to successfully finance. And that's something that they're looking to change. So how do we do that? It's by standardizing the process, the first few steps of the pre-finance process, and adding some crucial elements that are now not necessarily part of your standard preparation. So the first is that a project developer will input the raw data of their project onto the EQuad platform itself. And from that, a third-party financial valuation will be performed on the platform, so that all of the first initial numbers that a financier needs to see are written clearly on a pro forma designed for investors. So it basically enables the project to be presented to funds in a professional, clear manner that a fund can quickly assess. They save a lot of time right here. So whether they can see whether it's interesting for them, and that ESCO comes off looking their best. that they know what they're talking about, that their Excel sheets are clear, that they've been reviewed the same way by us, and we'll also help them review their contracts with their end clients, as well, as this is also a very important piece for investors. And so we just bring that package together from the start and make sure it's solid to bring to a fund. The second portion of that is to really close the circle and make sure it has been reviewed by an internationally recognized manner, by a standardization body such as ICP, the Investor Confidence Project. We only use ICP accredited quality assurance providers. And then we get that project and insurance quotation. So Dave and Paul will be telling us much more about the value of that after my own presentation, so I won't really go into detail right now. But put it this way, by the time a project has been evaluated by us, reviewed by us, presented in a standardized manner, the contracts and the due diligence documentation is in order, and then it has an insurance quotation from an internationally known insurance provider. It's just a completely different thing. It's a completely different animal than, you know, a local SME that's trying to approach a 100 million euro fund on its own. So not only does it provide backing for the ESCO, but it also helps them create that sense of trust with their own client. And having these elements set up and included in its commercial offering can also help the ESCO sell future projects and close existing projects as well. Once that process has been done, we introduce the contractor to investors, some of whom we've been working with for about 2 years since we were an EU project. They know us, they trust the process, and they take a serious look at the project, and we support the first few steps of that discussion. So these are some of the investors that we are currently working with. We have upwards of, I think, 30 investors in our network. It's everything from publicly supported banks to small funds that are working very locally, very specialized, looking at very specific types of projects in a specific area. So it really is across the board. And again, this isn't all of the investors that we work with now. It's just a partial list. And so then we look to match the projects that we receive with the specific needs of the fund. So here you can see that a little bit in this process. We look to lower the upfront processing fees for investors. We look to provide them projects that have been initially vetted. This mitigates and lowers their own costs when they're engaging with a particular ESCO and a particular project. So to give you a couple examples, this is a client that we had in Italy who was retrofitting apartments. They had a portfolio of about 1 million euro. Each of these projects is between 40 and 75,000 euros, I believe. Most of these projects have an internal rate of return of at least 14%, if not about higher. So this one here is at 15.5%. And it's interesting that these projects, the smaller ones, tend to have a larger or a higher IRR than some of the large ones. And the payback time was very good, etc. So overall, it was a very solid portfolio of smaller projects. And we did succeed in matching this portfolio with a fund in France that was willing to invest in Italy and was interested in this portfolio of projects. The next one, this is a company that we worked with in Northern Ireland, and they had never done an ESCO model before. They were just purely doing lighting, and they had been working as an installer for a number of years, but we're looking to change business models. So what they really needed to do was to get together a pipeline and present it to funds and get the finance so they could actually sell this offering. And this was definitely a chicken and egg dance for the client. I think that this is something that most energy service companies are facing, is the chicken and egg. You need the finance in order to get the client and in order to sell your offering. And you also need to have your pipeline in order to get the finance, in order to get on a financier on board. So they moved really fast. They did have good connections in the industry. But what's interesting about this is that they had a pipeline. They got together in a short amount of time, a pipeline of 5 different projects, I think a few industrial, 1 agricultural, 1, I think it was a commercial project. The pipeline in total was £370,000 for 5 projects. So each of these projects were under 100,000, around the 50 to 75K mark. They weren't big, but they had a very solid sales plan in place. They had a very solid strategy to get more clients and a strategy for growth. And we successfully matched them to a fund that actually was looking to invest in just these types of projects. And the fund offered a £5 million SPV, so off balance sheet finance, which is crucial to a company's growth, because it means they can just, once they had that money, they could just keep going with it and running with it and selling that and offering that in their core service offering to their clients. So that's mostly all for me. I would just want to finish up by going back to the last 2 case studies and just making a couple remarks, because these ESCOs have been successful in their sales. And what we've seen, the reason why they've succeeded is because they're selling their clients a package of a project, insurance, and finance as one single offering. Particularly if you want to target smaller projects with quicker sales cycles, that's, I think, what you have to do. You can't just, I think, go and do an audit and then spend 2 months perfecting exactly how you would enter that building and then sell that, and then discuss whether the client wants finance or not, and then discuss whether they want insurance or not, offering the option in a sense. By the time that you've done that, it's at least a 9-month cycle for real. And the Italian ESCO that I mentioned earlier, they indeed, when we first started working with them, their sales cycle was incredibly long. It was anywhere from 9 to 18 months on average. And so because of all these questions going from step by step, you have to go to the top of management with your client, and then often deal with lower down, and you're dealing with all sorts of different levels of management at different times, and it takes forever, basically. So it really takes forever when you go in that way. So what we've seen, and what I would just highlight, is focusing on sales to begin with, and realizing that this isn't an engineering driven industry, but a sales and marketing driven industry. Just within resourcing within a company, the salespeople, the packaging that you bring forward, the materials, the messaging that are provided, it's a huge, huge portion of that, of a company's success. And so it's not just the engineering knowledge alone. And then given that, I think that there are many ways to do it. It isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. However, repeatability is also very important. The second client that you saw, they really had, in a way, I mean, lighting is a fairly simple service solution. So if you're looking at doing different technologies, of course, it would look different for you from you, but they had a very repeatable client contract, a repeatable kind of cookie cutter offering. And when you go in and you start with 0 from a client, and then you have to build up the offering from scratch, and what's going to be included in that offering, you've added time and cost to closing the sale. So which is why we really encourage ESCOs to come with a ready-made package. So already having access to finance and selling it as such, that you have this finance solution, already have it be repeatable, know what you're selling at the outset, have the process be smooth, predictable. Within that, that's really what is going to lead to very, very clear messaging with the client, which will in turn also really support in building trust from the very first, from the first touch with that client. It sets you up to more actively engage them and get them on board, I think, to energy efficiency. So that's all from my side. And now I would hand things over to Dave Worthington, who's Managing Director at Verco. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caroline. And thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. So I'm going to start by covering a bit more detail on some of the barriers and issues, and the reason why there's such a need for the service and the products that Caroline has just described, and then go on to explain ICP's role in this and how we've been working with Dual and HSB to try and close this critical gap between the money and the projects. This ICP is also supported by the European Commission. We actually had two different projects. First, to develop ICP for buildings, and more recently to develop ICP tools and platform for industry, district energy, and street lighting. And just a very quick slide on Verco, for those that haven't heard of us. So we're an energy management and sustainability business. We're employee owned with a net zero mission to help our clients achieve net zero emissions as quickly as possible. And next year we'll be 30 years old. And our work covers work on government policy through to work for corporate clients. So the finance gap that probably all of you will be familiar with to some extent. So investors on one side wanting big deals with little or no risk, and wanting kind of a large pipeline. Project developers are on the other hand wanting kind of more flexible arrangements to deal with maybe multi-phase projects, each phase of which might be quite small in its own right, and wanting cost-effective finance. One of the things that can bridge this gap is insurance, and I know Paul McCullum will be specifically talking on that point. But the other thing that can bridge that gap is standardized sort of efficient tools, which is really what I'm going to be speaking about. So the reason standardization is such a problem in energy efficiency is just the huge range of different building types, particularly when expanding out to industry and infrastructure assets. So we did a major survey for the UK government called the Building Energy Efficiency Survey, and in the UK we have 1.6 million different premises, and no two premises are identical. So you need a standardized process that deals with that, because if you have inherent variation in the building type, the function within those buildings, and the technologies that are used to achieve reductions, then the only thing that you really can standardize is the project development process itself. As Caroline mentioned, also real barrier is that the energy efficiency is not generally a customer's first priority. But Caroline referred to the recent Bayes report on the energy efficiency market or energy services market, and similarly we researched this as part of the Building Energy Efficiency Survey, and we talked to around 200 energy managers as part of that, and we asked them to list their sort of three most important barriers and why they weren't progressing with projects. And you can see the word cloud here that was generated as a result. And I'd probably summarize that by saying that it's generally resource constrained, which is a direct function of the customers needing to focus on core business. So they're not investing in in-house skills and the budgets, the capital and operational budgets required. So what this means is that the products need to be very well marketed, again, as Caroline mentioned, but they also need to be really simple with very, very compelling messages and clearly streamlined and efficient processes. Again, that's largely where we've come from with the Investor Confidence Project. And another issue is with the way that projects have been structured in the past and still are to a certain extent, is that there's just too many different standards, accreditations, and processes out there. So you could have three identical buildings all trying to achieve the same outcome, but all being developed in different ways, which introduces variability and risk for all parties. So whilst we're not trying to kind of reinvent any wheels unnecessarily. What we are trying to do is put a consistent umbrella over the top of existing best practices in the market. And finally, on sort of the current issues, this image is a sort of fair reflection of what we've been doing with a lot of projects, where we've been acting as the independent quality assurer, where we just see a huge array of different spreadsheet tools and proprietary software products that are being used to undertake the estimates of savings. They're incredibly hard to quality assure. Some are locked, some are sort of partially locked, and it's kind of not open source. So there is further standardization required to drive down the transaction costs associated with doing sort of independent reviews, because as we found on ICP, that third-party independent check on the promises of an ESCO is one of the critical things that we hear clients asking for, to give them more confidence in going ahead. So this lack of standardization, what was highlighted as the number one supply and demand side barrier by the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group in their report, which is 3 years old now, called Energy Efficiency, the First Fuel for Europe. And investors involved, there were over 100 involved in that report, and a number of them described what they saw as real kind of failings in the energy efficiency market to meet their typical needs, where they would be looking to mobilize lots of capital, because each project is too small, and they didn't see enough scope to aggregate projects which all had a sort of similar level of risk. So the solution to that is the the Investor Confidence Project label. So it's a project level certification as opposed to a building level certification like BREEAM or LEED. And the critical ingredients of this are, again, the consistent approach to project development using best practices, and then an independent verification that the savings proposed will be achieved. So the project types that we cover, as I mentioned earlier, are buildings, industry, district energy systems, and street lighting. District energy systems are an incredibly complex area. At the moment, the projects that we cover are those where there's an existing baseline and essentially a like-for-like replacement of components, or something where the IPMVP principles of monitoring verification can be followed. We haven't yet found a way of dealing with new build systems where you're connecting to new loads where there's no baseline. So that's really an area of further work and further research. But all the other asset types have protocols which have now been finished, published, and issued. And as I mentioned at the end, we're now training the market on the use of those protocols. So how does it work? The project developer undertakes the activities to baseline the projects, calculate the savings, document all that in an evidence pack, and send it to a quality assurance provider, who then reviews it, checks compliance with this standard approach, and then issues the certificate. So that can then become one of the things that is checked off prior to investment going ahead and financial close. So the investment proceeds, the project is built and goes into the operational phase, and then the projects are monitored and verified in line with the protocols and typically one of the IPMVP categories. You'll see on this slide, which is the ICP Investor Network, that there's quite a high degree of overlap with the companies that Caroline showed earlier, who are also supporting and the dual assets services and the EQuad platform. So all of these investors are supportive of this approach, and some of these offer lower underwriting terms, or faster underwriting and lower cost of finance, because they appreciate that ICP does reduce risk, and clearly risk is an area that Paul Cullen will be speaking more about shortly. We now have 268 allies who've signed up to, again, support what we're trying to do. And we've actively used the protocols on 36 projects and programs across Europe now. So we're well into the sort of rollout phase, particularly for buildings, and we're just starting the same process for industrial and street lighting projects. One of the first projects, or the first certified project in Europe, was a large hospital scheme in Liverpool with 13 million capex, so quite a large one, working with the Carbon and Energy Fund, Macquarie as investor, and ENGIE as developer, and my company Verco provided the quality assurance, and that really demonstrated that ICP works for quite complex hospital schemes, but also for generally for the Carbon and Energy Fund framework, because we also demonstrated that their framework was consistent with what we require. And our first, what we hope will be our first industrial project is very close to certification now. What we're seeing is a lot of applications for heat recovery, and this one was heat recovery from two fast cooling plants, recovering the heat for ventilation, with also some secondary benefits on refrigeration efficiency. So smaller scale than the hospital scheme, 156k capex, but very replicable across many different industrial facilities across Europe. So finally, what is required to become an accredited developer and quality assurance assessor? You can see on this slide who has been through the process already. So we've got quite a few companies on the buildings list. So I mentioned we've only really started going to market with industry and energy supply and street lighting. So we're looking to increase coverage there. So project developers need specific individuals that can oversee projects that are either professional engineers or have a relevant science degree, plus some additional relevant certification. And my contact details will be at the end, and on the handout slides, if anyone wants to find out more details or ask us specific questions on your own situation. You need to confirm that you have experience across the 5 project stages, and also take some training online. It only takes a couple of hours to go through that. Quality assurance assessors, you can see on there, is a similar story to the project developers, again looking to increase the list across all 3 types, and the requirements are very similar. There's a slightly more intensive test for the quality assurance assessors, because there are a lot rests on them to uphold the integrity of the scheme. But we've been through this process with, as you saw from the last slide, a number of businesses now, and typically anyone in the market doing this already should be able to get on our list. So what's next? We do have 2 online training courses coming up. Firstly, for the industrial energy supply protocols on the 20th of November, and then 2 days later for street lighting on the 22nd of November. And you can sign up for those on the ICP website. Just Google ICP Europe and you should get straight to the site. You can also, on that site, join our networks and our ally network of supporters. And finally, we, through the European Commission funding and the Horizon 2020 project, we do have funded support for those that want to work with us to certify industrial energy supply and street lighting projects where we can provide the quality assurance support and generally help people integrate the ICP system in your processes for a limited period. We have just been awarded a slight extension, so it is a first come first served basis. But if your project is starting in the next 6 months or so, then there's certainly time to engage with us. So finally, the real benefits of this is hopefully that you're all able to get more projects approved, because we have seen evidence that the use of this scheme and the certificate can be the critical thing that convinces the client to go ahead. A lot of clients can be nervous about energy efficiency services, the potential lack of transparency and complexity, and the same to simplify this, give them confidence to go ahead. And for those developers that have worked with us as early adopters, there's certainly some differentiation there over your competitors, where it can be an added thing that you can mention, and you can use the scheme to show that you've been through a process and been actually validated as a best practice provider. And for investors, the due diligence costs and risks will reduce the more and more the scheme is used, and hopefully then that drives a much larger market for everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Yeah, Paul Cullum here from HSB. I'm just going to share my slides now. Hi, yeah, good morning, or indeed good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name's Paul Cullum, and I'm the Alternative Distribution Manager for HSB Engineering Insurance. I'm here to talk about energy efficiency insurance, and I think it's fair to say that insurance is not a purchase that most people make with a smile on their face and a happy heart. It tends to be a purchase which is done out of necessity, a fairly reluctant purchase. But sometimes insurance, when used properly, can also be used as an enabler. And we think energy efficiency is a sector where the right insurance product in the right place can act as an enabler to help people actually realize energy efficiency projects and help bridge that gap which Dave was talking about between ESCOs and investors. So first of all, who are HSB? Well, I won't bore you with a long history of the company, but we are a specialist technical insurance company, and we've been doing that for about 150 years or more now. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Munich Re, who are the largest reinsurance company in the world, and we have the highest possible security rating from AM Best of A++ superior. So our credentials are pretty solid. So how did an insurance company like us get involved in the energy efficiency sector? Well, we've been involved in renewable energy for many years, and we did notice that there's increasing funding being available for energy efficiency, but there didn't seem to be any kind of insurance products that were suitable for that particular market. And as outsiders coming into the energy efficiency sector, we also noticed that there were a number of barriers coming up in terms of that were stopping energy efficiency projects happening. There was certainly a lack of knowledge, and Dave's been and Caroline have both been through some of these, and a lack of focus. Energy efficiency is not always top of the priority list for the financial director of a firm. Sometimes a bit of a lack of confidence, or maybe even outright disbelief that the sort of savings that can be accrued can actually be realised. And a general sort of reluctance to get involved in something that they don't understand. But one barrier that we noticed was most consistent was the problems getting access to finance for energy efficiency plans, because when it comes to renewable energy, you've got something a little bit more tangible. You've got assets being installed and you've got energy being produced. Energy savings are a little bit less tangible, I think. And also we noticed that there was definitely a language barrier in the energy efficiency sector, whereby ESCOs would talk in engineering and investors would talk in finance and didn't necessarily communicate that effectively. And so what we thought insurance could do would be to act as a bridge or even a catalyst between ESCOs and investors to make energy efficiency projects much more attractive. So we went about developing a product that would to do that, and that was our challenge, if you like. So how did we go about doing that? Well, we developed an insurance product which has three main elements to it. The first is to actually cover the equipment that's being installed as part of a retrofit project. So that's covering it against the normal sort of all risks that you would expect: accidental damage, fire, theft, a mechanical electrical breakdown of the technology as well. And then also to cover any revenues that are being generated by that technology, whether that be through fiscal incentives for energy efficiency projects, the revenues being generated by the ESCO themselves. But really, there's nothing particularly unusual about that. Whether any kind of energy-related project can get physical damage, equipment damage, and revenue covers as an operational risk. But the one thing we wanted to add that would create a fairly unique product for the energy efficiency market was to cover an element of asset performance on the back of the retrofitted technology. And so we created asset performance insurance as a third section under the coverage. And what that provides is a cover for a shortfall in savings achieved by an energy efficiency project. So we're not only covering the assets, but we're actually covering the energy saving performance of those assets as well. So ultimately, if a projected saving is being guaranteed by an ESCO, and that project, for whatever reason, and there are numerous reasons why these things can shortfall, whether that be miscalculation, faulty or inherent problems with the technology or the installation quality or whatever, then we would cover any shortfall in those savings, predicted savings being achieved. The other thing we realized was quite important is that these are often quite longer term investments. Most insurance is annually renewable, but these projects often have return times of 3, 4, 5 years. So we thought it was very important to make sure that any product we developed would have at least a period of up to 5 years of cover being available as a single period of cover, a non-cancelable period of cover. So that people would have the confidence that a project will deliver savings, not just in the short term, but over the sort of medium to longer term of life of that project as well. So we developed that product and released that in 2014, and have written a number of projects since then across UK, Ireland, Spain, and further afield as well. Also, pleased to say it also picked up an insurance industry award as well for innovation. It won the British Insurance Awards for innovation a couple of years back, in recognition of the fact that we'd found a solution for a problem that didn't have anything in place prior to us developing the product. So how do we actually go about ensuring energy efficiency risks? Well, there are three main stages to that. I mean, first we need to collect a lot of information. So we need data about the actual product itself, and what energy conservation measures are being used, and basically a general sort of data collection process. We then actually have to assess that and calculate the risk being posed by that project. And for that, we would often use third-party expertise to carry out a technical audit of the project, and then we look at each energy conservation measure in turn and look at how we think that will actually perform against the projections. So we'll look at what is the best case scenario for that technology, what the worst case is, and also the most likely performance, and compare that to the projected savings being touted. And then we will also, very importantly, look at the correlation between the different energy conservation measures. Quite often, we see sometimes the same piece of energy being saved more than once. So we obviously look for potential double dipping in terms of energy savings, and actually looking to see how energy conservation's interplay. And then we use a patented algorithm that we've developed to calculate the overall likelihood of energy shortfall, energy saving shortfall occurring over a number of times by carrying out lots and lots of Monte Carlo iterations over thousands of years in order to work out an average shortfall in savings that we think that project is likely to accrue. So having done that, we then issue a quotation to the customer. And that can be done in a number of different languages. We partner with international insurance broker Willis Towers Watson to distribute our insurance products around various territories in Europe. And what that provides is evidence to potential investors that that project is insurance ready, that is ready for investment, and that the technical risks are effectively being transferred across to an insurance entity. And that's potentially quite powerful. In terms of some of the projects that we've been looking at, we've looked at a huge range of different projects, some commercial property, street lighting, industrial properties, a number of different occupancies. Here's an example of a retrofit program for a hotel chain. I think it was in the Republic of Ireland. And that was a total capital expenditure of 2.8 million euros, creating annual savings of 460,000 euros over a 5-year period. And we put together a package for that with a deductible of 20%. So that basically meant that the ESCO was happy to take the first sort of 20% of shortfall at their own risk, but wanted cover for everything beyond that point. So we agreed to take all of the risk below 20% shortfall in savings being achieved. And what I wanted to do really was to use this example as an illustration of why insurance can act as a really effective way of making a project inherently more investable. With the insurance, with the transfer of that technical risk to a highly rated insurance partner, we can take something which has a much lower inherent credit risk. In this case, if we use the example of a double B minus rating for the project, by transferring that to a highly rated insurer, you're effectively transferring a lot of that technical risk to a much higher credit rating, and that has a positive effect on the project as a whole. So, looking at this particular example, the chances of sort of achieving a much better score of double B plus or triple B minus even is well over 98%, which is usually the acceptable threshold. So what we've been able to do by transferring risk across to an insurer is to turn, in this instance, this illustration, a double B minus rated project into effectively a triple B minus risk, so i.e. an investment grade risk. And that can result in an equivalent sort of reduction in cost of capital to the investors, and that's why an insured project can be inherently more attractive to investors. Now, we developed this project, as I said, and launched it in 2014. Around about the same time, we got involved in the SEIF project, which Caroline outlined at the beginning of her presentation, and we were very pleased to get involved with that project because what SEIF and then ultimately the IIQuad platform that's been produced as a result of that project is able to do is concentrate distribution of energy efficiency projects into one online platform. And I think that's very attractive for all parties involved. So we've been very happy to partner with Dual Asset and Verco and all the other partners on the project to provide the insurance element of the equation. So when ESCO register projects into the EIQuad platform, we get a third-party valuation done by Dual Asset, and then project certification through Investor Confidence Project, which enables us to be able to offer performance insurance with a high degree of confidence, because we know it's been through quite a rigorous review process, and enables us to sort of complete the package under the EIQuad solution by providing energy efficiency performance insurance, so that when these projects are presented to investors, they are reviewed, they're credentialed, and they are insurance ready. So lastly, I wanted to just look at what the overall benefits of energy efficiency insurance can be to everybody involved in the energy efficiency cycle. Well, for customers, you're looking at reduced operating costs actually being realized, because projects are actually much more likely to happen in the first place, along with the consequent reduction in carbon footprint. And most importantly, it gives customers the confidence that the project that they've initiated with an ESCO is insurance backed, and that those savings are effectively guaranteed by insurance. So that's good for confidence. For the ESCO, well, their assets and their revenue are protected by the insurance, but most importantly, the performance of those assets is also protected. And that provides improved credit risk, which makes it easier to access finance, and also means that they have inherently much more confident customers at the end of the line as well. And then lastly, for investors, for them, a lot of the technical uncertainty around a project is actually removed by the insurance and passed over to the insurance. That also means that the loan repayments are protected, because the revenue from the project is protected by the insurance as well. And as we've seen by the example, the cost of capital can be reduced quite significantly on an insured project. So really, I think benefits all round, and hopefully that illustrates how insurance can act as an enabler for energy efficiency projects. So I think that's all for me. I know time's getting on. I think I need to hand back to Caroline now for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Dave, very much for those presentations. And indeed, because we got started a tiny bit late, we are running out of time, but I have a couple questions, so I'll just get right to the point. For ICP, for Dave, I have a question here. There's two questions. So how do you deal with the fairly wide range of potential project types across buildings and industry? And who owns and operates ICP right now?
Okay, thanks, Caroline. Good questions. So on the first one, one thing I didn't have time to go into the detail of was exactly how the protocols are structured, but we have come up with a range of protocols to deal with the different scales and complexities. So on the building side, we actually have 6, 3 for domestic, 3 for non-domestic, and the scales generally selected by protocols dealing with really complex projects with lots of interaction, and protocols dealing with really simple projects that maybe a single technology or portfolio of single technologies. And then we also have 2 protocols for industry, again, one for complex, one for simple, and one protocol for street lighting. And on the second point, in terms of who owns the scheme, it's actually owned by the Green Business Certification Inc., so one of the largest operators of environmental rating schemes around the world. So they also run LEED, GRESB, and a range of other similar schemes. So they've got a very experienced outfit in commercializing and scaling up these type of projects.
Great, thank you. And a couple questions for HSB, for Paul as well. Are there specific technologies that you will or won't provide insurance for, or any energy efficiency projects in general or client types that you would prefer to take on versus those that you wouldn't? That's the first question. And then the second is, can you provide an example of insurance for, this is very, very specific. Can you provide an example of insurance for a chiller, or imagining it's one specific technology? How long would the insurance last for? What would that look like?
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks for that. In terms of technologies, we are pretty agnostic in terms of particular technologies. We actually cover the project as a whole rather than the individual technologies. So the only thing we would probably be nervous of is something which is obviously entirely prototypical and therefore has absolutely no performance track record. We need some kind of baseline of performance, obviously, to assess a project. So other than prototypical technology, we're pretty open. We do everything from controls to lighting to replacement heating systems to materials as well. It doesn't have to be mechanical, electrical. So we'll also do installation of materials as part of a project as well. So from that point of view, we are pretty open. And in terms of occupancies, again, a whole host of different occupancies we've already written insurance policies for, from industrial to commercial, residential, street lighting, local authority, medical, health. So you name it, we're fairly open. If technology of some sort is being retrofitted in, we're likely to be able to do it if it's not prototypical. And in terms of an example, a specific example of a chiller and how long that cover would last, as I said during the presentation, we're able to provide specific cover for a project for anything up to 5 years. We can provide cover beyond that, beyond 5 years. It is possible to renew the contract after 5 years if cover is required for longer periods. But in terms of an initial sort of first non-cancelable period of insurance, then 5 years is the maximum we can write currently.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you and to the audience for sticking with us all this time. It's been a pleasure to share this past hour with you, and I did receive again some questions in the little questions box about the materials being handed around after. Yes, everything will be circulated. I will be sending it via email this afternoon. So don't worry, you'll get everything that you need if you want to review the content that you heard today. And also, please feel free to follow up with your questions if you are interested in learning and engaging with us, if you have projects, or if you're looking on the investment side of things for projects. This is really our day-to-day work at Joule Assets, and we're very, very happy to have ICP and HSB on board as partners. I really believe that this is a key solution that has been missing from the market up until now, and I'm very grateful that we had this EU project. So we're very much looking forward to looking forward to see how the market will evolve over the next few years, and hope that we can support as many as you as we can. And with that said, I will wrap us up. So thank you again very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.